As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
In today's political climate, there's little room for nuance, just rigid binaries. You're either a patriot or a traitor, a nationalist or an anti-national, pro-government or a radical. But how did we get here? Why has political discourse across the world been reduced to such stark binaries? To understand this, we need to go back to the economic and political shifts that shaped the modern world. Welcome to Deep Dive with Outlook. Today we will discuss binary politics. After the Second World War, capitalism flourished, but by the late 1960s, markets became saturated, corporate profits shrank, and economic growth slowed. Workers in the West demanded better wages and welfare benefits, but corporations pushed back. To revive capitalism, leaders like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan championed a new model, neoliberalism. The state withdrew, industries were privatized, and financial markets were deregulated. For a while, this seemed to work. But by 2008, it all came crashing down. The financial crisis shattered public faith in neoliberal capitalism. Governments bailed out corporations while working class people suffered. As economic frustrations grew, political elites needed a new way to maintain control, and they found it in authoritarian populism. When economic solutions failed, leaders turned to ideology. Instead of addressing the real problems, growing inequality and economic instability, they offered simplistic enemies. From Trump to Bolsonaro to Erdogan, leaders weaponized binary thinking. According to scholar and writer Anand Teltumbde, they framed every issue as a battle between two sides. Patriots versus traitors, dissenters became enemies of the state. Hindu versus anti-Hindu. In India, religious identity became a political tool. Nationalist versus anti-nationalist. Criticizing the government meant you hated the country. People versus elite. Populist leaders positioned themselves as saviors of the common people while being part of the elite themselves. But why do autocratic regimes love binary thinking? Teltumbde writes that it keeps people divided. If society is split into opposing camps, no collective resistance can emerge. It fuels fear by creating an enemy, whether minorities, immigrants, or activists. Leaders justify repression. It consolidates power, positioning themselves as defenders of a religious or national identity. Authoritarian rulers silence opposition in the name of unity. And the consequences? The media is co-opted or silenced. Judicial institutions are weakened, elections become mere formalities, civil liberties are curbed. But binary thinking doesn't just shape politics, it reshapes society itself. Political theorist and analyst Ajay Gudavarti argues that breaking binaries could create a crisis of meaning, ethics, and direction. Binaries may create power, but they also structure how we understand the world. For instance, the concept of mother has no essence of its own. It only makes sense in contrast to father. Meaning is generated in a relational sense. When we dismantle binaries, do we gain true liberation or do we enter an era of confusion? The rejection of traditional binaries has led to normative confusions, where everything that was once considered stable is now in flux. Is this a space for creativity and self-fashioning, or does it risk leading us into nihilism? The epidemic of loneliness, global regimes of boredom, and rising anomie are symptoms of this crisis. Gudavarti writes that psychoanalysts have warned such uncertainty can be the breeding ground to fascism. When people feel lost, they often seek rigid order. Historically, moral ambiguity has been exploited by authoritarian figures. So, when we think of breaking binaries, are we at risk of mistaking banality for true multiplicity? But can democracy truly thrive without nuance, dialogue, and coexistence? You can read more on this in our latest issue, The Grid.